Hello, today we start with something a bit darker. A grimy, gaslit world of Victorian London. A city of grand ambition, industrial marvels, and crushing poverty. This wasn't the London of Sherlock Holmes or Queen Victoria's garden parties. This was the London of fog, filth, and fetid smells. A place where surviving the day was a small miracle. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you truly enjoy what I do here. And tell me in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now, turn down the lights, maybe put on a fan for that gentle background hum, and let's settle into tonight's journey together. You open your eyes, and the first thing you see is your brother's foot inches from your face, twitching slightly from some horrible dream. Welcome to your one room. It's not a bedroom. It's not a living room. It's the room, and it's all of it. You share it with 6 other souls, 1 bed, 2 chairs of questionable structural integrity, and a rat that's been around so long you're considering charging him rent. There's no wallpaper, just stains on the wall where something used to be. The ceiling drips when it rains. Even when it doesn't rain, it drips something you've decided not to investigate. The fireplace is fake. The air is damp. The floorboards groan as if trying to warn you of your own mortality. You're wrapped in a thin wool blanket that hasn't been washed since the Crimean War, and the pillow under your head is made of straw, possibly mixed with someone's forgotten sock. There's no plumbing. That bucket in the corner, that's the toilet, the bath, and the emergency water supply, depending on the time of day and the level of desperation. You've learned to breathe through your mouth in the mornings. It helps a bit. There's a window, if you can call it that, so caked with soot and grime that most of the time it just lets in the sound of cartwheels, hawkers yelling, and someone aggressively coughing 3 doors down. You try not to think about the fact that the window overlooks an alley where the knackerman dumps his offal and your neighbour keeps his goat. Every morning starts with a familiar churn. You dress under the blankets to ward off the chill. You take turns around the basin like it's a game of musical chairs with fewer prizes, and someone always knocks over the slop bucket. And yet, somehow, this room is still home. You know which floorboard creaks, which corner drips, and which window pane rattles just before your neighbour shouts about his stolen boots. You know the smell, the dust, the strange sense of belonging. But make no mistake, this room isn't comfortable, it isn't pretty. It's a place that prepares you for the day outside by making you suffer a little before you even step foot out. And trust me, the streets won't be any kinder. You stumble out the front door, still blinking sleep from your eyes and clutching half a crust of bread. You immediately run headlong into a wall of choking fog. But this isn't the romantic, gas-lamplit mist they write about in novels. No, this is London's infamous pea souper, and it's like trying to breathe through a cold, clogged sock. The sky is grey. The street is grey, the air is grey. You can't see the end of your own arm, and you're pretty sure that thing ahead is either a lamppost or possibly a horse. It could be either. This fog isn't just weather, it's a killer. Formed by the happy marriage of industrial coal smoke and natural mist, it clings to everything, seeps into your lungs, coats your throat, and gives your clothes that characteristic London look, soot-stained and mildly flammable. You cough. Everyone coughs. It's part of the local soundtrack, like church bells and clattering hooves. Children cough like long-time smokers, old men cough so hard they rattle the window panes, and doctors, well, they recommend moving to the countryside, which is great advice if you own land and your own set of lungs. The smell is a complex bouquet: chimney soot, sour gas, horse manure, and last night's overboiled cabbage. If perfume makers bottled this, it'd be called Eau de Urban Misery. And it gets into everything: your hair, your bread, your one nice shirt you wear for funerals and job interviews. Everything is tainted with the scent of progress. The worst part? Nobody's surprised. People go about their day blindly, literally. Street lamps burn all day long and still don't help. You hear someone stumble in the alley next door and someone else swear as their umbrella disappears into the murk like a ghost ship. The night gets even thicker. The fog curls through cracks under doors. It blankets the tenements, and if you don't keep a candle lit, you might walk straight into the fireplace, or worse, your neighbour's lap. So yes, the air in Victorian London doesn't just suffocate you, it marks you, smokes you, and dares you to keep breathing. And you haven't even made it to the street market yet. You've crawled out of bed, out of your smoke-permeated den, and down into the grey commerce of the day. Now, your stomach rumbles. Breakfast time. Except breakfast in Victorian London is less a meal and more a ritual of lowered expectations. If you're part of the working class, and you almost certainly are, breakfast isn't eggs or toast or a hearty pile of bacon. It's a crust of bread that could double as a roof tile, maybe some gruel if the oats haven't been eaten by the rats in the cupboard, and tea. Always tea. Not because it's comforting, but because it's boiled, and anything that's been boiled probably won't kill you. Milk? Only if you can afford it, and even then, it's a gamble. It might be watered down or worse, formaldehyde preserved by vendors and entrepreneurs who think a child-safe is a flexible guideline. Sugar is expensive. Butter, a legend. Jam, only if your aunt died and left you some in her will. If you're lucky enough to work in a factory or live near a bakery, you might smell warm bread in the air. Don't get excited. That's not your bread. That's someone else's breakfast, probably belonging to a man with a top hat and a surname on the door. And if you're really down on your luck, an orphan, an unemployed widow, or just someone who lost their job to a machine, you might find yourself in line at the workhouse for a ladle of greyish porridge. It's warm. It's edible. That's the kindest thing that can be said. Street vendors might offer fried fish or stale meat pies, but beware, the meat is unidentifiable, the oil is ancient, and the chances of intestinal regret are high. Still, the smell is oddly inviting. When you're starving, everything smells like hope. You eat quickly, standing, huddled in your coat like a cloak of denial. There's no dining room, no soft morning music. Just cold fog, clattering wheels, and the distant sound of someone already shouting about stolen coal. And now, with bellies only half full and spirits not at all, it's time to step into the real monster, the streets of London. Welcome to the streets of Victorian London. A chaotic, sprawling organism, pulsing with smoke, mud, and misery. Every step you take is a calculated risk, and the street doesn't care if you're late for work or just trying to cross the road without being trampled to death. First things first, there are no sidewalks, or if there are, they're so narrow, cracked, and crowded that using them is a polite suggestion, not a guarantee of safety. The main road is a muddy battlefield of clattering hooves, cartwheels, and ankle-deep sludge. Horse-drawn carts barrel past at terrifying speeds. Carriages cut corners. One false move and you're face down in a puddle that smells like something died in it, because something probably did. Now, watch out for the gutters. They run down the middle of the street, carrying all the city's discarded glory, rotting vegetables, dead rats, coal ash, the contents of slop buckets flung from upstairs windows, and the occasional optional foot shoe. Crossing them without slipping requires Olympic-level balance or a very long stick and no dignity. But it's not just the terrain that's against you, it's the people too. There are street urchins running like caffeinated squirrels, pickpockets accidentally brushing against your coat, and hawkers yelling about eels, piekeepers, or something vaguely called meat. Everyone is yelling all the time about everything. There are also the policemen, trying to look important while ignoring most of what's happening around them. If someone gets stabbed, they'll eventually show up, assuming their shift has ended or they haven't been bribed to look the other way. The air is still thick with pollution, now seasoned with horse manure and pipe smoke, and in the distance you hear the bells of St. Paul's Cathedral, or maybe it's just your ears ringing after someone shouted in your face about chimney soot. Oh, and if it rains, which it often does, the streets turn into rivers of filth. Nobody offers an umbrella. Nobody even looks surprised. You just pull your coat tighter and keep going, hoping your boots don't dissolve. This is just your commute. Survive the streets, and you might live to find a job, or at least something that pays enough to keep bread on the table and rats off your toes. You've navigated the sores disguised as streets, dodged horses and hooligans, and now it's time to earn a living, if the city allows it. In Victorian London, a job isn't a title. It's a test of endurance, a way to slowly disintegrate while clinging to the illusion of stability. If you're a man, you might be lucky enough to land work in a factory. 12 to 16 hours a day, 6 days a week, for wages that wouldn't feed a well-behaved cat. The noise is deafening. The air is thick with soot, metal shavings, and regret. If you lose a finger to the machinery, don't worry. There are 20 children lined up behind you, ready to take your place. Don't like machinery? Try bricklaying, or hauling coal, or working the docks, where your back gives out at 30 and your teeth fall out at 40, if you live that long. Women? You're scrubbing floors, washing other people's laundry until your hands dissolve, stitching buttons until you forget what daylight looks like. All for pennies. And when those options run out, there's always the street. No sick leave, no safety net, and no sympathy. Maybe you're a chimney sweep or a mudlark, sifting through the Thames mud at low tide for bits of rope, nails, or bones to sell. The smell is free, dysentery is also included. Or perhaps you've ended up in a workhouse, that magical institution where the destitute are helped by being worked to the bone in exchange for food so bland it feels like punishment. You're not here to thrive. You're here to not die too loudly. Jobs come and go. Sickness means starvation. Injury means hunger. There's no workers' compensation, no health plan, no HR department, just a foreman yelling at you to stand faster, breathe quieter, and stop bleeding on the equipment. And God forbid you complain. There's always someone more desperate behind you, willing to work for even less. Competition is fierce, and compassion is in short supply. So yes, you're employed. But don't get too excited. In Victorian London, a job doesn't get you out of poverty. It just gives you something to do while you're in it. In Victorian London, childhood isn't a time of innocence. It's a brief window before your back gives out and your lungs fill with soot. If you're small enough to fit inside a chimney, congratulations, you're considered employable. Forget toys and bedtime stories. By age 5, you're already working. 6 if your parents are merciful. School is a luxury. Work is your future and your present. You might be a chimney sweep, crawling through narrow flues, scraping away soot while praying you don't get stuck. If you scream, they'll poke you with a stick. If you stop moving, they'll assume the worst and move on. Or perhaps you're a match girl, dipping wooden sticks into white phosphorus that poisons your jaw until it glows in the dark and eventually falls off. The pay? A few pennies. The risk? Bone death. A charming trade. Some children are mudlarks, sifting through the toxic Thames mud at low tide, searching for nails, rope, anything remotely sellable. You emerge caked, freezing, and probably infected with something Victorian science hasn't even named yet. Others hawk newspapers on the street, yell about roasted chestnuts they can't afford, or deliver messages for pennies. You run fast, dodge traffic, and hope today isn't the day you get trampled by a horse or beaten for looking at the wrong man wrong. Factory work? That's the dream. Indoors, fixed hours. Just ignore the amputations. Children clean under noisy machinery, often while it's still running. You learn fast, or you lose a hand. No safety gear, no days off, no sympathy, just sweat, noise, and an ever-present adult barking orders. And if you're an orphan, the world owes you nothing. Workhouses, the street, or worse. Some are sold into servitude, others simply disappear, absorbed into the fog, a footnote in someone else's history. In the eyes of Victorian industry, children are cheap, obedient, and disposable. Childhood isn't stolen, it simply isn't offered. And yet, somehow, they survive. They play with scraps, sing songs in alleys, and laugh between shifts, between coughs. Why do they have to? Because in London, even children are expected to carry the weight of empire on their tiny, soot-covered shoulders. If you thought surviving Victorian London was hard as a man, try doing it as a woman. You work all the time, and no, you don't get applause or medals. You get calluses, exhaustion, and a society that expects you to smile while your spine collapses. If you're single, you might be a domestic servant. This means scrubbing floors from dawn till dusk, carrying coal scuttles, blacking the grate, ironing until your arms ache, and never sitting unless told to. You eat last, you sleep in the attic, and your employer's whims? Well, you should feel grateful, apparently. Married? That's no better. It's double duty. You clean your own home, probably a single, filthy room, raise children, usually several, cook with nothing, sew everything, and manage the entire household budget on 3 shillings and a prayer. And then, maybe you take in laundry from wealthier homes, boiling, scrubbing, wringing, repeating, just to afford bread. Some women become seamstresses, stitching shirts in dim-lit corners for 14 hours a day. It pays pennies, ruins your eyesight, and if your fingers bleed on the fabric, you lose the job. And then to the match factories, where white phosphorus eats away at your jaw, literally. You start with a toothache, you end with a rotting face. Management says it's your fault for chewing too much. When none of this pays enough, or when you're widowed, orphaned, or just plain unlucky, the street becomes the only option. Sex work is legal, unofficially ignored, and socially condemned. You might make enough for food and rent, or you might be arrested, attacked, or worse. Protection? Only if you count wool gloves and luck. Victorian London women are expected to be quiet, clean, obedient, and always busy. You are the moral center of the home, even if the home has no floorboards, heating, and no future. There are no rights, no maternity leave, no safety net, just other women, sometimes kind, sometimes cruel, trying to survive the same nightmare. But somehow, they do. With grim determination, whispered jokes, and backs bowed by centuries of unpaid labor. And still find time to comfort their children and sweep the doorstep. Why? Because someone has to. You might have dodged the horses, survived the soot, and even landed a job, but in Victorian London, you can't dodge disease. It's everywhere, lurking in the water, in the walls, in the air, and most likely in the meat pie you ate for lunch. Disease doesn't knock on your door. It sits next to you on the omnibus, sleeps beside you in your tenement, and creeps into your lungs as you wait in the breadline. Let's start with the basics. Tuberculosis, or consumption, as they called it, because it slowly consumes your lungs, your body, and your will to live. The cough is deep, constant, and comes with blood. Everybody knows someone who has it. Most people just keep working until they drop. Then there's cholera, which arrives via your drinking water like a particularly cruel surprise. 1 minute you're fine, the next you're vomiting, dehydrated, and desperately trying not to soil yourself in public. It spreads fast. Entire streets go silent. The local pump is chained up, too late, by then the damage is done. Typhus, scarlet fever, diphtheria are regular visitors, each with its own personality, but all sharing one thing in common: they hit the poor the hardest. If you can't afford a doctor, and you can't, you're left with herbal remedies, homemade poultices, or the magical healing properties of hope. Of course, there's always laudanum, a beloved concoction of alcohol and opium, sold over the counter. Got a fever? Take laudanum. Aching joints? Laudanum. Mourning the death of your 8th child? Double dose. You'll still die, but you'll die very relaxed. And doctors, well, they mean well, sometimes, but medicine is still guessing with Latin. Bloodletting and leeches are still in vogue. Surgeries are done without gloves. Antiseptics are a twinkle in Lister's eye. Your chances with a street barber aren't much worse. Disease doesn't discriminate, but your living conditions help it pick you out faster. No sanitation, no ventilation. 10 people to a room is a perfect breeding ground for microbes, misery, and mold. In Victorian London, if something doesn't kill you fast, it'll kill you slowly. And if you're still somehow standing, it's time to replenish your water. You're sweating through your soot-stained shirt, your lips are dry, and your throat feels like it's been sandpapered by coal dust. Time for a drink, right? But in Victorian London, water isn't your friend. It's a loaded pistol with a porcelain handle. Let's start with the Thames. The city's lifeblood is also its toilet, its industrial dumping ground, its animal graveyard, and just to make sure, the city's main source of drinking water. Imagine a stew of rotting vegetables, chemical waste, dead dogs, human waste, and expired fish, flowing right past Westminster. Now, serve up a cup and say, "A cheers." Don't worry, the water company says it's filtered. That means it's passed through a mesh of gravel, wishful thinking, and possibly someone's old boot. If you live in a working-class neighborhood, your tap might come from a public pump in the street, which you share with 200 neighbors and 3 nearby factories. And the worst part? You might not even know it's deadly until it's too late. Cholera loves bad water, so does typhus. They swim freely through the pipes like microscopic sharks. Whole families are wiped out in days. One shared bucket, one misused slop pot, One splash from the wrong pump, and you're headline material, if you're lucky. Bathing? That's quaint. Most people don't own a bathtub. If you're middle class, you might share one with a family, once a week. If you're poor, it's a zinc tub in the kitchen, once a month, if that. And that same water might serve to rinse laundry, wash dishes, or soak aching feet. Hygiene is creative. The government starts installing sewers, eventually, thanks to the Great Stink of 1858, when the smell from the Thames was so horrific that Parliament fled the building. It took a stink to make change. Until then, you boil your water when you can, or you drink beer. The Victorian child and adult safe beverage, weak, warm, and slightly fizzy with salvation. So yes, in Victorian London, you can die from a glass of water. The trick isn't just to avoid thirst, it's to avoid where thirst leads you. You've tried honest work. It's long, dirty, and barely pays enough to buy yesterday's bread. The water might kill you, the factory definitely will, and the rent collector doesn't take IOUs. So what's left? Crime. And in Victorian London, it's not just an act, it's a career. First, be a pickpocket, or a dip, as they say in the slang. You blend into the crowds near the markets, gently bump into someone, and disappear with a pocket watch or a coin purse. Charles Dickens made Oliver Twist famous, but the real-life versions didn't have musical numbers. They were sent to Newgate Prison or deported to Australia. If you're a woman, you might become a fence, buying and reselling stolen goods in back alleys, under layers of shawls and dissimulation. Or perhaps you run a twilight house where pickpockets drop off their haul before the police come sniffing. Feeling bold? Become a coiner, a swindler, selling bruised fruit or watered-down milk from an old cart, disappearing before the complaints catch up. Or try your hand at counterfeiting, card tricks, or the ever-popular three-card monter, a fast-talking scam with an even faster getaway. And if you truly have the nerve, there's always burglary, breaking into a warehouse, a merchant shop, or if you're desperate, a church. You might find something valuable. You might also find a policeman with a truncheon and no bedtime. The police force exists, but they are underpaid, understaffed, and often 2 steps behind. Besides, you can bribe the right officer if you know the system. And let's be frank, you probably do. Crime syndicates in London were shockingly organised, some with territories, secret codes, and full recruitment pipelines. Then there are the resurrectionists, body snatchers who dig up fresh graves to sell corpses to medical schools. It's grotesque, it's illegal, it pays better than sewing buttons. Of course, the consequences are real. If caught, you could be whipped, branded, imprisoned, or worse, transported to a penal colony. But if the alternative is starving on a cold street, well, the risk has a certain appeal. Why? Because in Victorian London, morality takes a back seat to survival. Crime isn't the opposite of work, it is work. And for many, it's the only job that's hiring. Say you've caught something. A cough. A fever. Maybe your leg got run over by a delivery cart. Time to see a doctor. Good luck, because in Victorian London, medicine is less a healing science and more a creative improvisation with sharp metal. Doctors exist, of course. Some even wear coats, but unless you're wealthy, your first stop isn't a physician. It's a chemist, where the cure for every ailment is a small bottle of laudanum, opium in liquid form, ideal for anything from a sore throat to existential dread. It won't cure you, but you'll stop caring. Can't afford a chemist? Perhaps there's a barber surgeon down the street. Yes, a man who cuts hair and also amputates legs. If your wound is infected, he'll saw it off. No anesthesia, no antiseptic, just a stick to bite on and a bucket to scream in. And don't even think about hospitals. They're overcrowded, poorly ventilated, and smell of old bandages and lost hope. Instruments aren't sterilized. Surgeons wipe their hands on aprons between patients. Germ theory exists, but many still think disease is caused by bad air and moral failing. If you survive the treatment, the infection might finish the job. A splinter can become a death sentence. A toothache is 2 days from sepsis. And childbirth? Well, women go in with pain and come out with either a baby or a tombstone. Sometimes both. Medical textbooks are filled with confidence and wrong assumptions. You might be given bloodletting, a mustard poultice, or a mild electrocution to stimulate the humors. They balance the body by mostly draining it of blood, money, and hope. There are some progressive doctors with new ideas: cleanliness, hand-washing, maybe even antiseptics, but they're usually ridiculed by their peers. After all, how dare someone imply a gentleman doctor's hands carry germs? So what do most people do when they're sick? They wait. They drink herbal tea. They light a candle. And they lie very still. Because every treatment carries a risk, and recovery often feels more accidental than intentional. You don't go to the doctor to get better. You go because you've run out of other options. And sometimes, just sometimes, you come back alive. The sun sets, the gas lamps flicker to life, and the fog thickens like a shroud. You might think the city calms down at night, but this is Victorian London. When the light fades, the real dangers emerge. Forget cozy hearts and quiet evenings. The streets belong to the shadows, and they aren't empty. Gaslight struggles through the murk. Everything is a silhouette. A hunched figure in the alley, a hooded shape behind a lamppost, footsteps that echo one beat too long. If you're alone on the street, you're either lost or you've run out of better options. Police patrol in pairs, swinging their truncheons and trying to look menacing. But even the constables know that certain alleys are best left alone. Criminals own the night, and most wear softer shoes than a bobby's boots. Thieves, murderers, and pickpockets thrive after dark, and if your route takes you through Whitechapel or Limehouse, you hold your breath and walk faster. Not because of ghosts, though the fog plays tricks, but because someone might be watching, and in 1888, he might have a knife. If you're a woman, the danger triples. Men leer from corners, offers are whispered, some follow, others don't even bother to whisper. The darkness hides everything: faces, screams, and sometimes bodies. Even if you stay indoors, it's not always safe. Tenement buildings creak and groan. Rats scratch behind the walls. Fights erupt 2 floors below and end with broken glass or broken bones. Sometimes someone disappears, and nobody asks why. And let's not forget the fires. Chimneys spark, stoves topple, a knocked-over oil lamp ignites a mattress. No smoke alarms, no fire brigade that arrives in minutes, just screaming neighbors and buckets being thrown at a blaze they can't control. If you must go out, carry a candle or a lantern, and hope the flame doesn't blow out in the wind, or worse, attract attention. Why? Because in Victorian London, night isn't rest, it's risk. The poor don't sleep peacefully, they sleep light, with one eye open, one ear attuned to the groan of the stairs. And for many, tomorrow is just something else to survive. Tomorrow arrives. Or at least, you assume it does, because in Victorian London, the light isn't so much seen but guessed at through the thick, choking smog. It arrives like something alive, a greasy, grey mist made of coal smoke, fog, chimney ash, and the tired sighs of thousands of overworked boilers. It wraps around the buildings, seeps through the cracks, and settles in your lungs like the tenant who refuses to leave. You cough. Again. You never really stopped. The smog irritates your throat, clings to your skin, and leaves your eyelashes sticky. Everyone coughs. It's part of the daily soundtrack, along with the church bells, the clatter of hooves, and someone shouting about turnips. You wipe the windows. The cloth comes away black. You wash your hands. The water turns grey. Your clothes, no matter how scrubbed, always smell faintly of smoke and despair. Even your curtains are stained with soot. They hang heavy and stiff as if they've seen too much. You think about opening the window, then remember what's out there. More smoke, more grime, and the smell of 12 chimney fires fighting for dominance. The worst part? This is normal. Londoners live in a permanent twilight. The sun is a rumour. People squint to read. Children grow pale. Window box plants gasp and die. And don't even think about drying laundry outside, unless you like wearing soot-stained shirts with a hint of arsenic. During the infamous Great Smogs, the air becomes so dense you can't see your own feet. People get lost walking home. Buses crash. A boat collides with a pier in 1873. One smog lasted 5 days straight and left over 270 people dead. The city barely noticed. The poor, of course, suffer the most. Their fires burn cheap, dirty coal, their walls are thin, their lungs weaker. Children wheeze through the winter like old dogs. If you make it to adulthood without bronchitis, tuberculosis, or mysterious blackened phlegm, you're a miracle. And yet, you carry on. You light the stove. You step outside. You pretend not to taste the air. Why? Because in Victorian London, the smog never ends. It just waits for you. You'd be forgiven for thinking Victorian London was nothing but soot, sickness, and shouting, and most of the time, you'd be right. But even in the grimiest corners, under the weight of poverty and fog, something human still stirred. Because kindness, strangely, also survives here, though you often have to strain your eyes to see it. You might see it in the shared loaf of bread, silently passed between neighbours when one family runs out before payday. Or in the woman who gives her last penny to a barefoot child with bloody feet. There's no reward, just a nod, and perhaps a rare, precious smile. Even in the darkest places, the rookeries, the alleys, the workhouses, people look out for each other. Not always, not perfectly, but often enough to prove the city hasn't completely broken them. A mother shares her hot brick on a freezing night. A chimney sweep helps a new boy not get stuck on his first climb. A dying man wills his boots to someone who still has strength to work. They aren't grand gestures. They're small, silent, but worth more than gold in a place where hope is a rationed luxury. The pubs help too. They're noisy, smelly, overcrowded, and absolutely essential. It's where people gather to sing, to joke, to drink away their aches and their sorrow. You might not have money for meat, but you can share a laugh over watery ale. Even the street performers, the penny dreadful sellers, the blind fiddler on the corner, all form a kind of patchwork comfort, a reminder that not everything in the city is there to hurt you. Kindness here isn't naive, it's practical. It's born of shared suffering. Because when the system forgets you, when the rich pretend you don't exist, your only safety net is each other. And so, despite everything, the dirt, the fever, the fog, people still love. They still marry. They still raise children. They still hope. Because if you can find kindness in the gutter, a warm hand in the cold, a crust of bread, a half-hummed lullaby, then maybe the city hasn't won yet. Not yet. So, after 14 chapters of choking soot, rats in the walls, toxic water, and toothless chemists prescribing opium for a broken leg, ask yourself honestly, would you have survived Victorian London? Probably not. Let's be clear, this was not a city built for comfort. It was built on coal, sweat, and the crushed spines of the working poor. Every day was a battle, against hunger, against disease, against landlords, factory foremen, policemen, and the constant, creeping sense that the world had forgotten you. Modern luxuries, soap, antibiotics, light switches, didn't exist. There were no social safety nets, no universal health care, no days off. Just another morning choked by the fog, where your goal was simple: don't die before supper. You'd miss things, like bathrooms, toothpaste, tap water that doesn't try to kill you. You'd wonder why everyone stares at you for brushing your teeth or asking about vegetables. You'd miss showers. Oh, you'd miss showers so much. And yet, people survived. Somehow. They endured. Not because they were superhuman, but because they had no other choice. They formed unions. They raised families. They organized strikes. They wrote novels. They played music on street corners. And they clung to hope like it was the last piece of bread in the larder. They laughed, yes, even in the fog. They found love in overcrowded slums, sang lullabies to crying children, and danced in pubs after 16-hour shifts. They weren't just victims. They were strong, resilient, and painfully human. You probably wouldn't last a day, and that's not an insult. It's a reminder. The people who did last, they carried the weight of an empire on their backs, often barefoot, often hungry, and almost always ignored. They built the world we now complain about from heated rooms with clean tap water. So perhaps it's okay that we couldn't make it. But let's at least remember them. Not as soot-covered statistics, but as people who survived the impossible every single day. Gorgo was born into a city that not only broke rules but redefined them. Sparta, unlike the rest of Greece, wasn't known for golden temples or philosophical debates. It was known for warriors. And Gorgo? She was born right at the top of that brutal food chain. The daughter of King Cleomenes, and one of Sparta's 2 reigning kings. From the moment she drew her first breath, Gorgo's life was already political. She was no ornament to be married off for alliances. In Sparta, women could own land, speak in public, and be educated, a fact that shocked other Greeks. And Gorgo wasn't just any Spartan woman. As the king's only child, she was expected to observe, to learn, one day to exert influence in a world dominated by hoplite shields and sharpened spears. As a young girl, she likely witnessed royal councils where matters of war and diplomacy were debated with urgent directness, and she paid attention. Her father, Cleomenes, wasn't the most stable ruler. In fact, some thought he was entirely mad by the end, but he left Gorgo with an early understanding of how dangerous politics could be and how sharp the razor's edge of power. There's a famous story. When she was only about 8 or 9 years old, a foreign ambassador tried to bribe her father to support the Persian Empire. While the adults whispered, young Gorgo stepped forward and boldly warned her father, "Father, you had better go away, or this stranger will corrupt you." This wasn't just precocious, it was fearless. Her father listened, and the man was cast out of Sparta. The lesson? Gorgo had teeth, and people learned early not to underestimate them. So, even before she was of marriageable age, Gorgo was already showing signs of political brilliance and steely judgment. She wasn't just royalty by blood, she was royalty by demeanor. And in a society that admired discipline, clarity, and brutal honesty, Gorgo thrived. Her destiny was already in motion, not as a passive queen in a golden palace, but as a Spartan lioness, ready to guard her people, and if needed, speak louder than the kings themselves. Gorgo's marriage to King Leonidas wasn't a tale of romance and courtly wooing or opulent weddings. This was Sparta, where practicality reigned and weakness was scorned. Leonidas wasn't just any Spartan. He was a warrior through and through, known more for his silence and scars than for charm or poetry. But Gorgo wasn't looking for poetry. She was looking for power and a partner. By marrying Leonidas, she became queen, but unlike queens in other parts of Greece, Gorgo didn't fade into the background. There were no secluded women's quarters for her, no endless weaving by candlelight. Spartan queens were meant to speak, to advise, to stand beside their kings as intellectual equals. And Leonidas knew exactly who he had married. Gorgo was intelligent, fiercely loyal to Sparta, and utterly unafraid to speak her mind, even to him. Their partnership was built on mutual respect, in the notoriously laconic style of their people. They likely spoke few words, but every word counted. Gorgo, raised in the fire of politics since childhood, likely advised Leonidas on diplomatic tensions, Persian threats, and internal Spartan rivalries. While other Greek women were hidden from public life, Gorgo helped shape Spartan policy, both inside and outside the palace walls. One of her most legendary moments occurred during the lead-up to the Persian invasion. As tensions with Xerxes mounted, Leonidas prepared to march north with his small army of 300 Spartans. Before he left, Gorgo, by now a seasoned political mind, did not indulge in tears or pleas. Instead, she offered him just 6 chilling words: "Come back with your shield, or on it." That wasn't just a farewell, it was an order. It was the ultimate Spartan command, reminding her husband that death with honor was preferable to life with shame. If he could not win, he should die standing. And Leonidas did. At Thermopylae, he and his 300 fell to the last man, buying precious time for Greece to rally. His death would echo through history, but Gorgo's words would echo louder. She didn't just send her husband to his death, she helped forge the very myth of Thermopylae. While Leonidas died as a hero, Gorgo lived on to protect the legacy and perhaps to shape the empire his sacrifice tried to save. After Leonidas's death at Thermopylae, many queens would have retreated into mourning, perhaps disappearing from public life. Not Gorgo. In fact, her influence only grew. She became more than just a widow. She was now the living symbol of Spartan resilience. While statues were built for the fallen, Gorgo became a living reminder of why they fought in the first place. With Leonidas gone, Sparta was vulnerable, not just militarily but politically. The war with Persia still raged, alliances were fragile, and tensions ran high throughout the Greek world. Into this chaos, Gorgo stepped as both guardian and strategist. While we have no detailed records of her day-to-day political maneuvering, several ancient sources, including Herodotus, make it clear that when matters of diplomacy or internal threats arose, Gorgo was consulted. She wasn't just included, she was trusted. One story recounts a hidden message sent to the Spartans on a wooden tablet. The text had been scraped off and replaced with wax to disguise its content, a warning about the approaching Persian invasion. The men of the Spartan court were perplexed, but Gorgo, calmly assessing the strange tablet, instructed them to scrape away the wax beneath it. The original message revealed the dire news. Gorgo had solved a diplomatic riddle that could have cost Sparta everything. Her shrewdness likely saved thousands of lives. But Gorgo's genius wasn't just in puzzles. She understood the fragile web of alliances that held the Greek city-states together and the threat Persian gold posed to it. While Athens and other cities were notoriously vulnerable to bribes, Gorgo's sharp warning from childhood still applied, a beware of gifts that weaken. She encouraged a stance of uncompromising honor, even when it was politically risky, and the Spartans listened. Why? Because when Gorgo spoke, it wasn't with the softness expected of women in most of the ancient world. It was with the precision of a soldier and the clarity of a strategist. She knew what was at stake, not just the land of Sparta, but its very soul. Even in grief, Gorgo remained unyielding. The shield Leonidas carried to battle may have been lost, but Gorgo became something greater, the mind that would carry Sparta through its darkest days. To understand Gorgo's importance, you need to understand what it meant to be a woman in Sparta, and how Gorgo took that already rare privilege and amplified it into something almost legendary. Spartan women were unlike any others in the ancient world. While Athenian women were confined to the home, kept from politics, and barely educated, Spartan women were trained to be physically strong, mentally sharp, and socially assertive. This wasn't just a cultural flourish, it was a survival strategy. Spartans believed strong women produced strong sons. So girls ran, wrestled, and trained alongside boys in their youth. They were expected to be healthy, confident, and unafraid to speak plain truths. But Gorgo wasn't just one of many strong Spartan women. She was the prime example of what Spartan womanhood could be. She was known not just for her wisdom but for her razor-sharp wit. There's a famous anecdote where a foreign woman asked her, "Why are you Spartan women the only ones who rule your men?" Gorgo didn't hesitate. She replied, because we are the only women who give birth to men." That line wasn't just clever, it was pure Sparta. It signaled a culture where female strength was seen as essential, not ornamental. In Gorgo's world, motherhood wasn't a passive role, it was a political one. To raise a Spartan son was to train a future warrior. And for Gorgo, raising her own son, Pleistarchus, who would become king after Leonidas, was an act of devotion not just to family, but to the entire Spartan state. She likely oversaw his early education, surrounded him with the values of honor, sacrifice, and discipline, and instilled in him a love not of glory, but of duty. Yet Gorgo never flaunted her power. She didn't have to. Her voice carried weight precisely because she used it sparingly and always with precision. She was not a ruler in name, but a force in reality. While Sparta remained a dual monarchy, led by men, Gorgo's presence ensured there was always a shrewd strategist watching from behind the throne. In many ways, she was the unwritten law of Sparta, upholding its ideals, nudging its leaders, and sharpening its spine. Gorgo didn't just redefine what it meant to be a queen, she redefined what it meant to be a Spartan. The death of Leonidas at Thermopylae was a seismic moment, not just emotionally but politically. He became a martyr for all of Greece, a symbol of resistance against Persian tyranny. But Sparta could not grieve for long. The war still raged, and the decisions made in the ensuing months would determine the fate of the entire Greek world. Though Gorgo held no official office, her influence did not disappear with her husband's body. With her son Pleistarchus still a minor, a regency had to be established. While historical records don't list Gorgo as a formal regent, we can be sure she had a hand in guiding his education and shaping the political decisions made in his name. This was not a time for grieving mothers, it was a time for cold calculations. The Persian threat still loomed, and Greece was deeply divided. Athens wanted to fight at sea, Sparta on land. Unity was fragile. It was likely during this critical period that Gorgo became a sort of unofficial advisor to the Spartan Gerousia, the Council of Elders. She understood both Persian cunning and Greek pride, and most importantly, she understood how to balance Spartan honor with practical survival. Sparta could not afford to be reckless, nor could it afford to appear weak. Gorgo had seen what unchecked ambition did to her father, Cleomenes, and she had learned how to walk the tightrope of power. She would have been present as Sparta debated its next moves, whether to march north again, whether to commit troops to the naval battle of Salamis, or whether to defend the Peloponnese and let the rest of Greece fend for itself. These were not easy decisions, and they were being made by men who had just lost their king in a blaze of glory. Gorgo's presence, rational, emotionally controlled, and deeply patriotic, may have been the anchor Sparta needed. There is no record of her issuing commands, but there was no need. Spartan queens led by example, not by decree. Her very survival, her unwavering presence, was itself a form of leadership. In a city obsessed with honor, Gorgo had already proven she could carry the shield, and now, without Leonidas, she carried the memory of his sacrifice into every political decision that followed. As the war against Persia dragged on in the ensuing years, Gorgo's role subtly shifted from queen consort to queen mother, from political influencer to legacy guardian. Yet she was never a relic of a past age. Gorgo remained a living embodiment of Spartan ideals, a presence so formidable that even without a crown or a battlefield, she still commanded attention. Her son, Pleistarchus, eventually took the throne, but he was not the kind of king his father had been, quiet, less renowned, and largely absent from military glory. Pleistarchus ruled in the long shadow cast by Leonidas, and behind him, still watching, was Gorgo, the woman who had raised him, shaped him, and ensured he understood what it meant to carry the blood of a hero. But what made Gorgo exceptional wasn't just her connection to two kings, it was her mind, her reputation, and the rare fact that she appears by name in several ancient sources, something extremely unusual for women in classical history. Herodotus, the so-called father of history, mentions her more than once, praising her intelligence and relaying her ability to solve riddles and navigate political threats. In a world where women were often nameless shadows, Gorgo stood out, not as a myth or a mistress or a tragic figure, but as a mind to be reckoned with. She was, in many ways, the embodiment of what Sparta wanted to believe about itself, a society where even women were strong, wise, and ready to defend their homeland at any cost. Gorgo didn't need to fight with a spear. She fought with words, with counsel, with unyielding determination. Her contributions were not made on dusty battlefields, but in war councils and private conversations, in the raising of a king, in keeping a nation emotionally intact during its darkest hours. Even centuries later, Her name remains one of the few ancient Spartan women's names preserved by history. Not because she was a queen, but because she was impossible to forget. In an age where women's accomplishments were easily erased, Gorgo's intellect, her sharp tongue, and her political bravery left a mark too deep to be wiped away. She didn't inherit greatness. She carved her own version of it, and Sparta, brutal and uncompromising as it was, loved her for it. Sparta valued few things: silence, strength, and discipline. But Gorgo managed to make her voice one of its sharpest weapons. She didn't speak often, but when she did, her words were remembered for centuries. She was living proof that in a culture where words were precious, the right ones could echo louder than shields clashing in battle. Gorgo was a master of Spartan wit, a form of verbal warfare all its own. She didn't use metaphors or flowery speeches. She used truth, delivered like a knife to the heart of pretension. One of her most oft-quoted replies came when a foreign woman asked her, "Why are you Spartan women the only ones who rule your men?" Gorgo's retort was legendary, "Because we are the only women who give birth to men." The line wasn't just a jibe, it was a manifesto. In 6 words, it encapsulated the entire Spartan worldview and female empowerment in the way only a Spartan could, with direct, blistering pride. She used language like a general uses tactics. When she exposed the bribery attempt to her father as a child, she didn't stammer or beg, she issued a warning. When Persian messages came hidden in wax, she offered the solution without hesitation. Gorgo didn't just speak, she strategized through words, and Sparta listened. In a society dominated by men and built around the sword, Gorgo showed that intellect could also be a battlefield. Her statements carry the rhythm of command and the clarity of someone who understood power not as ornamentation, but as responsibility. She didn't need to shout to be heard, she made every word a dagger. And what made her words so devastating was that they were always anchored in truth. She didn't bluff, she didn't flatter. Gorgo knew exactly what was expected of her as a queen, as a Spartan, as a woman who had seen kings fall and wars ignite. She met those expectations head-on, not with emotional outbursts, but with calculated, unforgettable replies. Her voice was her weapon, her intellect was her armor, and while many queens are remembered for their tears or their beauty, Gorgo was remembered for what she said, for never saying something she didn't mean. In Sparta, that was the highest form of respect one could earn. Gorgo's later years were spent in a city that never softened. Unlike other Greek city-states that evolved into cultural hubs, Sparta refused to compromise its militaristic identity. It remained rigid, proud, and dangerously isolated. And Gorgo, still standing amidst its stone and bronze, witnessed the long consequences of Leonidas's sacrifice, not just for Sparta, but for Greece itself. The Persians were eventually repelled, yes, but the victory came at a cost. Sparta emerged from the Persian wars with immense prestige, hailed as the protector of Greek liberty. But with honor came rivalry. Athens, fueled by democracy and ambition, grew in wealth and influence, slowly shifting from ally to adversary. Tension simmered, and a new storm was brewing: the Peloponnesian War, a conflict that would define the next generation of Spartans, including Gorgo's own son. Gorgo saw the signs. She likely recognized that Sparta's strict ideals, once its greatest strength, were now becoming limitations. While Athens adapted and innovated, Sparta remained unyielding. The same military codes that once made Sparta invincible also made it inflexible. But Gorgo, ever pragmatic, likely accepted this reality with the same steely clarity she had displayed all her life. She had lived through more than one kind of war, not just the clashing of spears and arrows, but wars of diplomacy, of shifting alliances, of internal instability. By this point, Gorgo had likely become a living relic, in the best sense of the word, a link to Leonidas, a symbol of what Sparta once was, a reminder of what it could become again if it remained true to its core without losing reason to arrogance. No records survive describing her last days, but there's no reason to believe she met them with anything less than calm resolve. She had already done more than most women and most men of her time. She had ruled without ruling, fought without a sword, and shaped a city that didn't even allow its kings to indulge in softness. If Gorgo wept, she did so in private. If she hoped for the future, she kept it to herself. Because in Sparta, emotions were not for display. Legacy was. And hers was already secured in bronze and blood. Gorgo of Sparta didn't need marble statues or epic poems to be remembered. Her legacy was etched into something far stronger, the collective memory of a city built on discipline, honor, and defiance. Unlike other queens whose stories were draped in tragedy or romance, Gorgo's story is one of sharp intellect, political acumen, and enduring pride. She stood at the intersection of two of Sparta's greatest icons, daughter of King Cleomenes, wife of King Leonidas. And yet, she was never overshadowed by either of them. She was not a footnote in their stories, she was a chapter unto herself. Historians and scholars still marvel at how frequently her name appears in Herodotus's writings, not as passive royalty, but as a decisive figure in a world that almost never recorded the names of women. Gorgo broke the silence like a spear through a shield. What makes her legacy even more profound is that she never held official power. She didn't command armies or sit on the throne. She advised. She warned. She solved. She raised a king. And through it all, she embodied the terrifying dignity of Sparta itself, a city that chose death over disgrace, silence over boasting, and action over rhetoric. Her most quoted words, come back with your shield, or on it, are more than a footwell, they are a philosophy, a distilled version of the Spartan code. And though they've been repeated, rephrased, and even reproposed in modern times, they still carry the cold fire of their original context, a queen sending her husband to his death not with tears, but with a command to uphold honor. Today, Gorgo stands out among the few ancient women who are remembered not because they were tragic, beautiful, or scandalous, but because they were respected. She defied expectations in a society already notorious for doing the same. Her intellect was so pronounced, her voice so respected, that she became woven into the very identity of Sparta. She may have lived over 2,000 years ago, but Gorgo remains a figure of relevance for every underestimated woman, for every strategist working behind the scenes, for every voice that refuses to whisper. She is a timeless reminder. Strength isn't always loud, and power doesn't always wear a crown. In the heart of Jordan's sun-bleached deserts, where the horizon seems to merge with the sky and silence reigns over the sands, stand the remnants of a forgotten royal ambition, the desert castles. These haunting structures, scattered across the desolate landscape, appear almost like hallucinations, grand facades rising from the void, complete with vaulted roofs, ornate arches, and faint traces of long-faded frescoes. They are beautiful, mysterious, and isolated, and they have intrigued historians for centuries. Built during the Umayyad Caliphate in the 6th and 7th centuries, these castles were not erected to repel armies or defend trade routes. They weren't fortresses in the traditional sense. Instead, They were luxurious retreats, seasonal residences, pleasure palaces, and hunting lodges for the you-made elite. Kings, princes, and high officials used these spaces as escapes from the politics of Damascus, the capital of the Islamic world at the time. And rather than hiding from the desert's harshness, they embraced it. But why build such lavish structures in such remote, unforgiving places? Part of the answer lies in symbolism.